Hello, everyone. My name is
Hi.
Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I do my speeches, my topic is something I call Take the Doughnut, which is all about seizing the opportunity, seizing the day. That's what that expression means for me. And one of the things I wanted to seize this year was the chance to start conversations about the show Halt and Catch Fire. I've never really been able to talk about it with other people. And so this podcast has been a way to start doing that. And now we're up leveling this because I'm actually getting a chance to talk with people who worked on this show. So get ready. This is going to be a fun interview today. Now, I do want to just say one quick housekeeping item before I introduce my guest. If you watch the episode recaps, those are spoiler free. They're friendly for people who have never seen the show before, but this interview is going to be spoiler filled. We are going to be covering things from all 4 seasons of the show today. So please be aware of that. If you haven't seen the whole show, you might want to come back and watch this later. But, without further ado, I'd like to introduce my guest for today, who is Daisy von Scherler Mayer, who was a director on Halt and Catch Fire for 4 episodes, which I'll list here. Season 1, episode 8, The 214s. Season 2, episode 8, Limbo. Season 3, episode 1, Valley of the Heart's Delight. And season 4, episode 9, Search. Daisy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, it's great you're doing this. It's such a great show.
So many of us love it. A lot of people talk about it, just don't have a forum to do that. So I'm excited to really dig deep on some of these episodes that you did. But before we talk about the episodes, just give us some background here. How did you originally get the opportunity to work on Halt and Catch Fire?
I mean, by that point, I sort of broke into the business pretty young with an indie film called Party Girl. But once I segued into TV, I did Mad Men and I did Nurse Jackie, Orange is the New Black. So I was in sort of an indie filmmaker transitions into cool TV universe. Basically, I was in that category, not doing so much of the network stuff, but Halt was looking for directors like me. Karin Kusama's another, did Jennifer's Body, and I thought they did a great stable of interesting directors across the board.
Perfect. Well, when you direct an episode, the team's kind of operating, the show's been operating, you come in for that first episode. What kind of research did you do on the show? How much information did you have about where they had been? Do you remember much about going into that first episode?
It all moves really fast. It moves really fast. So mostly you're looking at the episodes that have been shot prior to yours and the scripts that are coming up. But pretty much that was about it. I think there's always a visual language, which the wonderful pilot director had established. I'm blanking.
Juan Jose
Juan
Campanella?
Jose Campanella, yeah, brilliant director. Anyway, so that language is kind of outlined for you, and you're working within that sort of template. But that changed. Second season we had a different DP and sort of shook it up. It evolved like the characters.
Absolutely. So, and you sort of hinted at something I was going to ask about, what is the difference for you between coming in for the first episode for a show and then coming in seasons 2, 3, 4, once you've had a little background with the show? Does it change how you approach it?
Oh, it's great. I mean, especially that show was such a small, intense cast, which I really felt like was almost a theater troupe. They were very tight knit and had a great process with each other. And so coming in, you felt like you were coming, yeah, like a theater troupe, like a summer stock or something, where you come back the next summer and what are we doing this year? And yet because I got to do the season premiere of season 2, I was able to shake up the visual language. We kind of evolved it a little bit, changing to oh no, was that season 3 that
Season
I did?
3. Mm-hmm.
Season 3, sorry, it's a long time ago. But yeah, because things were more kind of organic and hippy dippy when they were in Mutiny, and it got a little slicker when we went to season 3, but always a lot of fun.
Yeah. And you were sort of referencing a question that I want to ask in that answer as well. When you come into a show like that, I mean, you're very experienced in coming into shows and sort of putting your stamp on it and directing the team, but that requires you to come in and develop a rapport very quickly with people who have been working together. So, how do you go about that? It sounds like it was a smooth transition, but what are some of the things that you do to establish that rapport?
I mean, you have enough time, I feel like, with your creative team to, in terms of the production team, and then the actors, you really have to work quickly on set to to figure out sort of how they like to work. I mean, I feel like it's our job to adjust to them more than their job to adjust to us. If the actors are having to think about the camera all the time, and I if we can have an organic rehearsal and block things in a way that's efficient enough for the camera so that we're not getting ourselves in a hole, but that allows the actors, like someone like Scoots, a very physical actor, and he'll really work almost from the outside in. Like if he can find his blocking and where he wants to be and what he's doing in the scene, that really makes him free to play once you are doing take to take. And so I guess what I'm saying is it's adapting to how they like to work and not getting in their creative way and making it as smooth and efficient as possible so that there's more time to work on, like, do an extra take, as opposed to we're waiting on the lights or we're waiting on the camera.
Mm. You've directed a lot of TV shows. Is there anything in particular that stands out to you when you think about directing *Halt and Catch Fire*?
Halt was just a really fun visual landscape. Like, we could frame, like this, and do, like, that's the shot. Just whatever we wanted to do, whether it was make the audience uncomfortable or make somebody feel super intense or show somebody's anxiety. We just had a lot of fun with visually, and I never felt constrained by coverage. A lot of times on network shows, it's like everybody has to have a close up, and everything has to be captured in a certain kind of a way. And especially towards the end of Halt, the operator Glenn was really into this, like, small crane arm that he had, and so we would just do everything on the crane. It was like the crane was just following actors around, and it was a very fluid. Evans Brown was shooting then. It was really fun and fluid, and I don't know. I just it was a very creative, fulfilling experience because I didn't feel like there were rules. The rules were to not have it feel generic. The rules were to have it feel like an indie film, and to really be just focusing on what the story is, what the intent of the scene is, where the characters are at that moment. And then the other thing about it for me was just, for whatever reason, and I've talked to the Chris's about this, it became an increasingly more and more feminist piece of work over the years. So by the time we got to that last season, some of the scenes I did with Cameron uh,
Carrie.
and Carrie, well, not Carrie, but Donna and
Mhm.
Cam, were just so fascinating and so different than material I've done with other women, where it really was about work and ambition, and it wasn't, the talking about men or talking about their relationships all the time. It was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about some specific scenes from each of your episodes, because there's just so much to dig into with these. So if we go back to season one, episode 8, for these, I'll give a little setup for those who haven't rewatched all of these episodes right before this interview. I'll just kind of help you establish where we are in the story. So season one, episode 8, for me, when I tell people about this show, I really say that, like, season one, episode 8 to the end of the series, it's just operating at a different pace because you've really set up the story, you've set up the characters, you set up the relationships, and now we can just go all the way to the end. So it's a lot of heavy lifting for you to do, where we're transition this, to me, this episode is transitioning from, we're establishing to now we're on the move. And this episode has a lot happening in it. So we've got, for example, like, Donna is deciding to recommit to her relationship with Gordon. We've got Boz stealing money from the office. The office is getting raided. Boz is going to take the fall for Cameron here. Joe, he feels like such a failure that he actually goes back to his dad and he sees if he can get a job back at IBM. Gordon steals the giant from the office and gets the band back together, and they all decide to go on a rogue mission to Comdex, and that happens in one episode. So, one question I have for you as a director on something like this is, how do you approach the pacing of an episode where every storyline, every part of the plot has to be important, has to be moving quickly, but still has to feel distinct?
I mean, I think it is thinking about just that, just how to make it feel distinct. So for certain sequences like the raid, it's about getting a million pieces. So in the edit, you can just be really like run around from bit to bit to bit and feel the intensity that way. But then there was another moment in the office, and I think he's going to confront Joe, where I remember it was a very complicated shot with Scoot McNeary, where we were just really tight on his face, handheld, and pulling him all the way through the office and getting there and not cutting at all. It was a wonder all the way taking him there for his for that intense confrontation. And I feel like it's like dissecting those moments and keeping it super propulsive. So I loved, like, when I saw the set for Joe's apartment, that it had that glass wall, and instantly in rehearsal we came up with the idea of, like, shoving. Gordon shoves Joe up against the glass wall and sort of turns the tables on who's the big guy and who's the small guy in that world, in that universe. It was a lot of fun. I like those. It's better to get an episode that has a ton in it than one where you're trying to make lemonade out of lemons, where it's very slow and talky and you're trying to jazz it up. I'd much rather have it be inherent in the material. So that was a fun one. It was great.
You said something in there that I want to unpack a little bit more. So Gordon is sort of the hero of this episode. He's an MVP. I mean, he basically becomes Joe. He's really pulling everybody together. He steals the giant, making it possible for them to go to Comdex and for the rest of the show to happen. He has really the first moment of connection with Cameron, where he has a heart-to-heart with her and gets her to come to Comdex. He does exactly what you were just saying with Joe, where he out-Joes Joe when he gets Joe to come with them to Comdex. He doesn't know it, but he convinces Donna to stay with him through some of the things he sort of left behind in the scenes. So he's got a lot of, we really need to understand that this is a very developed Gordon that we're seeing here. So what is some of the work, that you did, or the conversations you had with Scoot?
I'm trying to remember, what's the name of the failed computer that Gordon and Donna did? Like
the Symphonic.
The Symphonic. I feel like basically the story of Gordon is an artist who kind of artistically died and just became really flat and is just a company man. And in this episode, he gets like Joe lights the fire under him, and then it gives him the opportunity to do the impassioned speeches that they had given to Joe and to Cameron earlier in the season. Like, they give them to Gordon now, because now it's like he becomes the, I don't know, like you're saying, the impassioned carrier of the torch. And I feel like it's a fire that he had before. That's why it works, because that he had this in them. He had it in him in the past, but it's just been subdued and suppressed, like all of us, going to work and not having that creative fire. And so it's in the writing. I mean, so much of this show, it's in the writing, but and in the performance, because Scoot's amazing, and he really, he just does so much with those monologues and with his physicality and with the nuance. It's great.
I like that point. It wasn't so much about igniting him as it was about reigniting him.
Yeah.
I do think that sort of changes the interpretation. And it sounds like that's something that you tapped into with Scoot.
Yeah. I mean, again, all those actors, particularly in the later seasons, they would do rehearsals by themselves. Sometimes they would invite directors, sometimes they wouldn't. It was really a really bonding sweetness, where they would get together on a Sunday night and read through the script for the next coming week and talk through it. And I swear, I remember being at one of them, and and Mackenzie and Lee were just sort of arguing in character, not like in a method acting way, but just always having the sympathy towards their character and saying, "Well, how you're the one who's doing this to me? How can you possibly think that I would?" And they were so deeply connected to the material and the characters. It's rare for me to find also actors that, because we were in Canada, no, Atlanta, nobody was from there, so I think at one point they were all living in the same house, or three of them were. It was just a very bonded group, and I think that comes across in how much acting is going on when they're not even talking. Like, they really understand each other. You feel like they're really attuned to each other in an ensemble way that you don't always have in TV casts.
Oh, it's so interesting. And it does come across in the feel of the show, I think. Let's look a little bit at season 2, episode 8, Limbo. So there are a couple of party scenes in this episode. There's one at the Mutiny House, the outside of the Mutiny House, and then, which is stylistically very different from, there's a nightclub scene with Joe and Sarah. And I'm interested to hear about both, but the nightclub scene feels particularly different in terms of style to me. That white room, the sort of pink purple glow, is a very dark scene, and yet it's very clear what's happening in it. So talk to me about that scene. How did you achieve that look?
I mean, that was a big episode and very challenging, but really fun. To me, it's like the 90s. Looking back on it, I don't know if I would have had this perspective then, but it's like the 90s and the 80s. Like, there was the party at Mutiny is just like a grunge, almost college, super barefoot and dancing in the mud kind of, keg of beer type party. And then the other one is much more based on the nightclub scene, and particularly the nightclub scene. We researched a lot, a specific club in Dallas that was known for being all white. Grace Jones used to go there, and we looked at images from that. We also had very little money, so we had a warehouse with no walls. We didn't like that set is being made out of crepey white fabric and lighting, and then a lot of funky lenses that are mimicking his drug trips. So we're softening the edges as he gets more and more high, and we did that even further later in the episode. And Lee is so good at it's. There are very few actors where I 100% believe they are really under the influence and tripping, and I thought he did an incredible job at portraying that, especially when he goes to Cameron at the end. But yeah, a lot of the other thing that's extremely important I've found in party scenes is casting the background actors and wardrobe on the background actors, because that's really what you're looking at. It's essentially literally smoke and mirrors that we're making a set out of nothing, but the lensing and the wardrobe take on a big effect. And just trying to capture, I had done my time, and my original Party Girl film is in the nightclub scene back in the day, so we all had familiarity. And they're just a little in jokes in there, like Joe has a bandana, which was kind of like a thing in the 80s of, like, if you wore it in one pocket it meant you were bi, if you were, and like things like that aren't referenced in the script, but we had a lot of fun trying to imbue it with as much nightclub realness as it were.
So many interesting details coming straight from your mouth. I love it. You started to talk about a scene that I find incredibly complex and interesting in the end of the episode, when so to set this up for everybody, Westnut has stolen Mutiny's they've stolen Community, and they've rebranded it, and they've locked Mutiny out of it, and everybody thinks that Joe did it. Joe didn't do it, and he comes to the Mutiny House to try to find Cameron to exonerate himself or explain, but he's under the influence, as you said. And the whole team, everybody who's ever been on the show, seems to be in the Mutiny House right now. And it's a very claustrophobic feeling space. People are kind of getting in front of Cameron almost to protect her. And I think about what I imagine that set was like, and it feels like it would have been a very tight space to operate in. So I'm curious how you approached, how do you shoot a scene like this?
One of the reasons, I'm trying to remember if that space was on a location or not. I feel like it was no, maybe it wasn't on location. Maybe they built it based on a location. I think that's what it was, but it was the true dimensions of a real house. A lot of, one of the things that made the design on Halt so cool is that things were really based on real things. So like Chris Brown did the first year, if there was an office space, so often production designers are trying to make stuff look better, so they won't just have plain white walls and blinds, and Chris will just have plain white walls because sometimes that's what offices look like, and he would look at the research photos. So for the Mutiny House, it's the real dimensions of that, haphazard little hallway. And I think with the blocking of that scene, Lee Pace is 6'5", maybe. He's a tall, big man. To make him look physically threatened by a bunch of rinky-dink kids is hard. So we had to have all of them and have them sort of flexing and coming in on him like a gang. And they're such sweet guys. It was in what you're talking about. It was filling the frame with people and people in front of Cameron. And then his performance being just so high out of his mind that he can barely articulate his thoughts. So he's not on solid ground, because I feel like otherwise he would just push past all of them and get to her if he wasn't wobbly and they weren't intense towards him. But
absolutely.
That was a fun one.
Well, I want to be mindful of your time. So let's just see if we can get through a few questions on seasons 3 and 4.
Sure.
Season 3, a top question for me is, we meet Ryan for the first time in this episode. And even on the very first watch, I had an instant impression of his character. I felt like he's so intense and it's not going to be a good end for him. I felt like from the beginning, I felt like he was going to be tragic, and I was very compelled. And I'm just curious, like, what are some of the things you do when you're introducing a character like this to establish that impression, not only of him, but you do sort of start to establish a connection between him and Joe. How do you approach that?
I mean, we definitely know where the story's going, even if you're just coming in and doing one episode. So I think, so we knew that connection had to be made. But I think for me, his now we would say neurodivergence, the fact that when he comes into that whiteboard with Cameron and Donna, he just goes like manically into it. So we put a wide angle lens really close up, like fisheye, and just sort of tried to visually tell the story that he is in his head and he's in the science, and he sort of doesn't have social skills. Like both of the women are kind of cracking jokes about him and rolling their eyes a little bit, and he doesn't get it. And that's I feel like Joe has a particular understanding of outsiders that maybe don't fit a sort of normal social cues. And that came across visually, but he also did a great job. That actor, he just had a really specific presence.
Absolutely. Well, season 4, episode 9 is an episode of just one highlight after another. It's almost impossible to pick a question here. So we've got a few. One is, Boz heading into the 21st century. What a beautiful little clip that section is. And it sounded like the Olympic music to me in the background. I mean, tell me a bit about
Isn't
that
it?
scene.
I thought it was, is it 2001? No, I can't remember.
It's very familiar, and I'm sure there were some rights to that song that somebody had to get. But tell us more about that scene with Boz kind of becoming a hero.
Well, he thinks he's going to be told he's dying. He thinks he's going to be told this is it. So it's that turn when the doctor says, "No, you're fine, you're great," and then we did another one of those long handheld oneers of just pulling him through the hospital hallway and out into the street, and then down low so that we could kind of have him up against the sky and the building in this, you shoot like Western, like John Wayne, you try and go low and look up at them and make them larger than life. And we gave Boz that cowboy treatment, which he certainly deserves, especially when he has a new lease on life that he will live.
That's really interesting. A very different stylistic moment that you've got in this episode is when we discover that Yahoo is now going to be the search engine on the Netscape
Yeah.
website. It's on the platform already, and we, as an audience, have a few seconds before Joe and Cameron even realize that that's the case. I think this scene is perfectly executed. Like, how did you make this happen?
I mean, I think Evans Brown as a cinematographer did a great job with the lighting in that scene because you really feel like you're in a dark abyss and the only light is the computers. To me, it feels almost like we're on a spaceship, because it's just them and the computers, which are colored lights, until Joe goes down to Gordon's office and throws the chair through the door because he hears his watch go off, which was very sad. The Gordon storyline was just devastating. But again, trying to, when it is about computers, it's really hard to make it visual. And so by putting that, doing the VFX where we became the point of view of Yahoo, looking at them, looking at the screen, which some of this stuff, I look at it now and I still feel like, I've seen that shot a million times. But I feel like, back then we weren't seeing that shot a million times. It was a show about computers before computers were as ubiquitous as they are now. Or a show that goes like deep into them. And we did another shot the next day when Joe is there and he's playing Tetris, and I had the reflection of the game put into his eye and posed. So any way we could be tricky where we were just trying to make the audience feel like the machines had an almost organic quality and we were somehow in them, or they were looking at us, or just to make this is their whole world is the internet. And it's hard to, now we feel that because we all have our devices and our phones and we're all on the internet all the time. But back then it was just like a new world, like they're the first people to go to the moon sort of thing. Yeah. And I also, again, those actors are just, they have so much intensity and they bring it, and so much back and forth with each other and their past romantic relationship. You can just feel her frustration with him trying to run the show. And, we're really in her lane of being a programmer, which is a much more solitary sort of, not the showman part of it, not the Steve Jobs part of it. This is like the programmer part of it. And we don't usually see that part, and it's hard to dramatize it, but she's brilliant. She's great.
Well, there were two scenes I know you wanted to talk about, and one of them has to do with their relationship. So they break up in this episode, but it feels like a two-part breakup where we have the scene of them at night in bed, and you sort of can see that they know it's over, but they don't confirm that until the next morning. You have that scene with them in two different rooms. And they really solidify, like, yeah, this is the end of the road for us.
It was just a moment that was really inspiring when we were scouting that location and realized that Joe could be sitting on the couch and she could be in the doorway, and there's a giant wall in between them. And it meant using a super wide lens. I think we were on a 14 maybe. But, the fact that we could, again, another show, I just don't think they would have gone for the giant blank wall in the middle of the shot. But for me, it gives it a real almost European film quality, because it's that negative space is the gap and the void between them, obviously, stylistically. And it's very architectural and it's very compositional. And that night before scene is them making love, and it's shot much more viscerally, and you're real close to them with the lens. So I don't know, to me, it was a nice contrast of, there's the intimacy of the night before, but it's only there because they know the next day it's over. And when he says, you were the thing that makes the thing, about computers, what they had said in the first episode, that was just a great piece of dialogue. I love that episode. It's a really nice one.
Well, we close that episode out with a totally different feeling. Donna and Trip are going to have a Yahoo off. They're in a meeting, and Trip informs Donna Yahoo is going to be on Netscape, and so we're going to sell Rover off for parts. And we find out the irony of it, that Rover is going to go back to a medical indexing company, which is what it was to begin with. And Donna just sort of loses it, and she says, "Drill down with me, Trip," and they start shouting Yahoo. Tell me about this scene, and how many times do people say Yahoo?
I just love First of all, presenting her as the master of the universe, pulling her through there as, like treating her the way you would the Bill Gates or the Steve Jobs or whoever we're basing it on, like the way she makes a very grand entrance through the elevator, and we shot her through another office and tracking along the glass, and all the extras are kind of like, bowing to her in a type of way. So she gets a great entrance. And then when she's there, just the ludicrousness that everything she's gone through is for nothing because of a random bit of events, and and all of her minions are treating it so seriously, and no one's seeing the crazy. I just feel like because we know that character and Carrie Bechet is so talented, we've seen it's a lot about the audience being in on the joke and the people in the room not being in on the joke. So we're with Donna. We get how silly this is, and her making fun of that group in the boardroom. I love her performance, and I really like how we lensed it, because we just were with her, and then afterwards we just sort of pull away in this empty kind of generic office, and I guess it's highlighting how mundane all of it is, actually. You know what I mean? The show often makes its own world, the larger than life thing, but it really is a business, and a business about technology. There's a lot of reasons why people said, "Oh my God, I can't believe that show, was going to happen or was going to stay on as long as it does." But I think it's because they found so much humanity in it. But it is also a boring technical, like, this is where the business part of it just rears its head, and that's what it's actually about, making money. And this thing didn't work, so now it's thrown to the curb. It's like show business in that way, I guess.
Mm. I mean, I've really enjoyed hearing all the details that you've
Thanks.
wanted to share here. If you have any others you want to share, feel free to do that. But I also wanted to ask, is there anything that you're up to now, or, where can we find you if you want us to see things that you're currently working
Oh,
on?
sure. Well, I'm always really busy. I'm upcoming doing the Apple show Invasion, which is really fun, big VFX show, and have a bunch of other stuff coming up later in the year. I have a website, daisyvontrollermayer.com, which I don't, put stuff in, but you can definitely see clips from my Halt episodes and excerpts from the press that we got about different things. And yeah, and they re-released Party Girl last year, my first film, which was really an honor. So it played internationally and around the country in art houses after a 30-year hiatus, just because the fans liked it, and they did a reissue. So that's now available. There's a 4K edition of that. But I'm just happy to be working with good writers, and hope Chris Rogers and Chris Cantwell come up with something new soon, because I would love to work with them again. Oh, and I should have mentioned Jonathan Lisco. I work on Yellow Jackets, which he does, I've done 3 episodes of that, and he does it with Ashley Lyle and Bart Nickerson, and he's always a wonderful writer to work for. And he was season 1 and 2, or just season 1, I can't remember, but it was, again, a long time ago, but great memories from everyone.
So many impressive projects that you've worked on, and I happen to love Yellow Jackets as well. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me, for answering all these questions and giving us some new things to explore when we do our rewatches. I really appreciate your time.
Okay. Bye, Melissa. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.